When people are experiencing alternator problems, they will soon find out that alternators can be quite expensive parts when you buy them new or even when you buy them remanufactured. I've looked into repairing and refurbishing alternators because my unit was making a strange noise at idle and I couldn't really justify myself spending more than £300 for a repair that only in parts costs less than £20. The essential components for repairing an alternator are less than £20 ordered and received at your postcode and address. After taking apart my alternator, these are the things that I would like to share with you, and these are the things that might save you the hassle of spending the full price tag on a new alternator. The most common fault that I've seen on alternators is just the brushes wearing down and not being able to energize the rotor. These components are quite easily changed without disassembling the alternator as much as I've done. You just need to remove this component. Your brushes are held in this case. You sand down those bits with a high power soldering iron. You are able to replace them and you are saving a lot of money by just doing that. At the same time, when you reach the point of replacing the brushes, you can easily check your slip rings, which should have material. If you don't have enough material, you can change the slip ring. That slip ring or the new slip ring looks like this. And overall, as a component, although it is harder to change, is not something out of the ordinary. The next wear item, the mechanical part of your alternator, will be the bearings. You will have a front bearing and a rear bearing. These ones in time, either due to corrosion and water ingress or other contaminants, might fail and might generate noise. Okay, to remove the bearings, here is a little bit more tricky because you will need a press to remove this one. But overall, pricing right now, and there are so many of them available, I went for something from US Pro, done the job, and if I need this type of tool for future work, I'm able to use it quite easily. The bearing is easy to remove. You insert the new one, keeping in mind all of the good practice tips for bearings. You don't hit them on the middle bits. You use another bearing to transport or to push in the new one. You avoid dynamic impact so not to damage the rolling surfaces. Same principle for the front and for the rear. You might also want to support this surface when you will be using a socket to beat out the old bearing. I've used the press. If you have one available, you can use that, or you can improvise something similar to that. But after doing it with the press, I can tell you that it's not something that is required, as these bearings are not really tight held in place. There might be other faults with your diodes, but based on the way that these are assembled to the case, they are much harder to replace and change. So at that point in time, you will need to go either to a specialist or replace the alternator with a new unit. In my case, after changing the bearings, I've noticed that there is another component that is holding the bearing in the exterior case. This is called the tolerance ring, and in my case, this one was moving too much, and I really believe that this was the source of that noise at idle that I couldn't stand and convinced me to take apart all of the other components. I tried to get the component by itself, ordered it, got 10 of them, but the sizing wasn't right. I really believe it's a manufacturing issue, and ended up using my old one with some epoxy. From a process point of view, if you want to do the work on this type of alternator, you don't really need to remove the stator as I've done it, because once you remove it, you will have a little bit of a harder time to resolder and refix those wires to the diodes. When you're doing that, a high power soldering iron will be your best friend, and having enough patience and preparing the wires will also be very important. Other things to consider when you're doing this type of work, especially on the more modern alternators. In my case, I have a fixed pulley, a normal pulley, but the newer ones have something called a clutch pulley, and for those ones, when you need to remove them, you might need a specialized tool set that will allow you to actually take out that part. And again, you might be able to use that press that you use for the bearing to remove the pulley from the shaft. The overall assembly, once you understand it, it's quite simple and it's quite straightforward. It's like playing around with Lego. You just assemble the stuff. Overall, you will need to assess your current situation and assess the alternator that you have. You might decide of buying an older unit and changing the wear and tear components yourself, clean oil contamination, clean corrosion or other substances that might affect the contact of the brushes and might affect your alternator. Avoid impact, don't knock on the wiring bits. You could use a multimeter to check for resistance, to check that your diodes are working correctly, but those are very isolated issues when we are looking at alternators. The majority of cases, it will be just a simple repair of changing the brushes. Now, I hope that this video gave you a little bit of an overview of what is possible to do on older alternators, maybe allowed you to save some money. If you like this type of video, maybe you like seeing this one also. In the meantime, thank you for watching and see you in the next one.